Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm joined today by Dr. Liz Evans, who is a personal friend for some years now, both her and her family. And we met about 4 years ago at the formation of the Heart Group, Health and Recovery Team. And Liz is a huge supporter of that. And of course, she's also formed her own medical freedom support group, supporting for medical freedom, that is UK Medical Freedom Alliance, which I think I may have misspelt in the yes, I have. I've left out an F in the banner, so apologies for that. And we have been in contact a lot over the years, but there are so many things happening at the moment that I thought it'd be useful just to catch up with Liz, who retired from her NHS practice and has become a naturopathic physician with her own private practice, and spends a lot of her time as CEO of the UK Medical Freedom Association and giving speeches internationally. I think you've been to Ireland a couple of times, promoting freedoms and promoting bodily autonomy, and is a tireless campaigner for all those things. And so I'm delighted to have Liz here. And perhaps, Liz, you can add anything to things I've left off, which I'm sure are quite a few. And then perhaps we can just chat about what's been going on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It was just such a joy to have the invite because I haven't spoken to you properly for ages. So this is a great chance for a catch up. I think we probably just both took a bit of time off over the summer. But yeah, it's been quite a 5 years fighting for medical ethics. Going back many years, I have been a campaign. I think I've got a campaigning heart. So I campaigned for many years on the health effects from wireless radiation, which not a lot of people know. Back when, so I was called a tinfoil hat person back in those days. But that was very much about medical freedom, informed consent. The fact that this pollution was being put out, particularly in schools, and exposing all of our children to a potential biological toxin without informed consent that may have long-term health effects for them and short-term health effects, and where there was no long-term safety data. So this was a massive experiment. So I think it was that side of things, and also the wealth of evidence that I discovered that this wireless radiation is harmful to health. There was probably about 10 to 20,000 published studies when I was campaigning on this in the early 2010s. There will have been more since then. Obviously, since then we've had 5G rolled out. But it was all being completely censored. People, there were huge doctor and scientist declarations about this. The International EMF Scientists Appeal, calling for this to be taken out of classrooms, that children shouldn't be exposed to it, calling for better standards on public exposure. And it was all being completely censored and rubbished by the mainstream and hidden. So I feel like I'd already done the COVID playbook before COVID happened. And then when COVID rolled out, I very quickly, I think being outside of the medical profession and sitting on the sidelines watching what was going on, it was very clear to me within a week or two of the first lockdown that there was something really wrong. Like, medical ethics were not being followed. Since when have doctors been scared of their patients, refused to see them, closed their doors? So that was a big red flag. And then a friend of mine who was in his 70s, got COVID, but the doctor wouldn't see him. And so over 10 days, he kind of got worse and worse, and then got admitted to a hospital walking, but just really coughing, and obviously had a chest infection, I would say. But within hours was on a ventilator, was there for 16 days with nobody allowed to visit him. His wife of 50 something years was home on her own with her husband on a ventilator. She was never, ever allowed to see him again, and they turned the ventilator off. After 16 days, she was not allowed to see his body. And she had the smallest funeral out. I think it was outside. There was only a handful of people allowed, whereas this guy was a massive figure in the community. And to me, that just screamed evil. Like, this is wrong. Like, we cannot do this. It doesn't matter how dangerous something is, even if we believed all of the hype and the fear mongering at the time that this was a terribly, terribly dangerous disease, that there are certain red lines ethically that you can't cross. You cannot stop people being with their loved ones when they're sick or they're dying. You can't, we shouldn't get rid of our humanity purely just to try to keep people safe. That just didn't seem right. So that's when I sort of started looking into COVID, and eventually 6 months later set up the UK Medical Freedom Alliance.
Yes, and I think we all went through that period of, and I mean, I don't have a scientific background, but there were just some things that logically weren't making any sense. Some of the restrictions being put in place, some of the terrible threats of what would happen or fear mongering that was going on, none of which proved to be happening. And the amount of psychological terror that was visited upon people, which made them more and more frightened, was pretty bad. That's largely, I think, been memory hold by a lot of people who just don't want to be reminded. And the problem with that is, of course, that we don't learn from it if we do that. And we don't, if we do memory hold, we don't recall what it was we saw last time happening again. And so I know you've been campaigning on that, and so have we at Heart. The issue of mandatory digital IDs, which is obviously the next thing on the list. The dampening down of religion into what looks like increasingly is more like a state-controlled, whether directly or indirectly, a state-controlled form of religion where certain protests are allowed and certain protests aren't allowed, and restrictions on prayer outside abortion clinics. I mean, these are all very dictatorial things, authoritarian things, which are completely antithetical to our Christian background and our Christian beliefs. The churches didn't really properly stand up against those things at the time. Only some did. We know at least 2 or 3 that did, but they were unique. Where do you think that's going, and what do you think your focus at UK MFA is going to be for the next 6 to 12 months and beyond?
Yeah, I think for me, the most devastating thing of all was the failure of the church to actually stand up and uphold, absolute moral values and ethics, and turned a blind eye to evil. What was happening, we're told we have to judge a tree by its fruits. It was so obvious that, all of this was being stoked by fear that people were lying. So that's, already not from God. We know that Satan is the father of lies, and, where there's fear and chaos, there is the devil. And then what was being done to people was so wrong. The suffering being caused by even just shutting care homes and visitors out of hospitals. That was obviously not a good thing, and was going to lead to abuse behind closed doors, where you've lost all your scrutiny, all of your accountability for staff. And that's now all coming out in the COVID inquiries in the UK and the Scottish COVID inquiry. There's been absolutely horrific testimonies from residents, from relatives of residents, and from care home managers, talking of just the most appalling abuses that were going on behind the scenes. It's looking like, for a start, there was a blanket do not resuscitate orders put onto residents, regardless of their age, of their health status. And then they were denied treatment, or so GPs wouldn't visit them because they were do not resuscitate. They were denied admission to hospital or transfer to hospital. And they were put on end-of-life protocols. If they had respiratory symptoms or were tested positive with COVID. So it seems to, the inquiry has admitted that there was a, what do they call it, a generational slaughter or something, a mass slaughter in the care homes. They're claiming it's because people were discharged from hospital with COVID and were spreading it around. But I think the evidence that's coming out in the testimony indicates that there were people who were dying from the abuse of these end-of-life protocols and through the denial of treatment for treatable conditions. If today you decided not to treat anyone with flu or, a severe respiratory virus with anything, and then you put them on an end-of-life protocol, you can create that massive spike in deaths immediately, because, we to abandon standard treatment just because something's called COVID was obviously going to cause more harm than good. And just all of the measures, shutting down society, spending, billions on furlough, all of those things, there was no wisdom. And I think the church's role in society is to be that voice of wisdom, of morality, of speaking sense when people are panicking, of giving an eternal perspective, which says there are some things that are far worse than death, and it's how we live. If we're living, and causing pain and suffering to people, that is far worse. And for 3 years, life was literally reduced to the avoidance of death at all costs from COVID. And it didn't matter that children's, education was being destroyed, that their mental health was being destroyed, that there was suicides going up, that nobody was being treated for any other illnesses, that therefore cancers were rising, that, and all of these immoral things like rolling out novel gene therapies to everybody, not just to people at the highest risk, but to everybody with no long-term safety data. So that was just obviously reckless. It should never have happened.
We saw yesterday, I saw yesterday a piece about the flu jab and how there's now evidence. I can't remember which site I saw it on. I think it was, it might have been the CDC. It was something official, which showed the spike of an uptake in the flu jab, and what they were expecting was a downturn in flu in the elderly. And they found, funnily enough, that isn't the case. The flu, the incidence of flu has increased almost in line with the jabs. Mm-hmm. The advice that's still being given is take the jab. It's okay. But they're also saying, and this is the bit I found most disconcerting, maybe we need to change the way we do this and give it to younger people so they protect the elderly. So we're right back to where we were at the beginning of COVID, where in a completely amoral, inappropriate, anti-Christian way, we were putting the onus and the fear into our children and grandchildren to take a new process, a new medical instrument in order to protect their parents and grandparents. But it doesn't look as though we've learned, because that's, yes, but that seems to be the same message is coming out again.
Yeah, it's the classic sort of satanic inversion of, and I think it really, the church didn't speak into that, and they didn't use their perspective. So we did a big conference, which is just being released gradually, the videos, 2 weeks ago, called Health and Truth. We did in Northern Ireland, say about the COVID and the church and how should the churches have responded, because they closed their doors. They were promoting the vaccine as the savior. There was a twisting of religion. There was no longer a faith in God. It was about follow the science. I mean, that's religious terminology. We're always taught we should be following Jesus. The minute you've got a church preaching to follow the science and take the jabs and mask up, don't sing, stop worshiping because it's more important to preserve your body than to worship, the Almighty God. It just blows my mind that happened, and I feel like I found this brilliant video, awful video, 3-minute video of about 12 different archbishops and bishops in 2021, all promoting the COVID vaccine and telling Christians they must get the jab, that they must trust the scientists, that this is safe and effective. And it's like, oh my goodness, talk about wolves in sheep's clothing. We are told, beware of wolves in sheep's clothing, beware of following false prophets, of following false religions and making idols of things. And one of those archbishops on that video has just been made the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes, indeed. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, seems to me like another. Well, I mean, you can't but really interpret that as the nail in the coffin for the cohesiveness, the cohesion of the Church of England. I mean, we come to the other points in a minute, but just from the Church of England's perspective, it's problematic for the developing countries to accept a woman as an archbishop. That's already a problem. So from the point of view of a tactical move, it was unwise, whatever the persuasion of that candidate would have been. From the perspective of the traditional Anglican Church, there is still a movement that finds it troublesome to have women priests, maybe less than there was, but it's still there, and women bishops. But the notion in the UK alone of an Archbishop of Canterbury who's a woman, that's already a problem. Then you add to that the fact that she seems to be very keen on gay marriage and wanting to move the woke movement forward. That is going to lead to the ultimate schism of the church. And as Jamie Franklin, whose clip we were just listening to just before we came on air this morning, a passionate appeal for the church to remember that it's based on the Bible and not to rewrite it. I can't see how the church recovers from that as a unity.
Well, because what the church has done is it's become conformed to the world, and they're seeking popularity in the world. And that is exactly the antithesis of what we're told to be in the Bible, that we have to be not conformed to the world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you will know what is good and what is perfect and true. You know, and I saw Jamie's amazing sort of plea to the next archbishop: just preach the gospel. That's what people need. They don't need you trying to preach all these ideologies that the world is selling, which are all causing so much destruction and devastation and division. We just need Jesus, basically. And that is the role. It's a very big platform that the Archbishop of Canterbury had. And what a waste of that platform during COVID, to not preach an alternative to the fear of the world, not to say, we have hope in death. Let us give you some hope. Come to our churches. We're going to sing. We're going to, greet each other with a holy kiss. We're going to have the common cup, and we're not scared, because there is something else beyond death. To be in a church where everyone was masked was so wrong. It was so dark. It just brought this very fear-inducing symbol, and it kind of undermined everything that was being said from the front, because it said, but actually, if you don't have a mask on, you're in danger. And you think, do we believe any of these words that, the hymns say, that the Gospels say? Or do we just think, are we just going through the motions? So, yeah, but I think what's happened is the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm doing a talk in a couple of weeks at the UK Column Conference on all the threats to medical ethics, but it just feels like pharma have basically captured everything. And their tentacles are in all of the important institutions, like the church. All of the churches did this. It wasn't just the Church of England. We had the Pope saying it was a moral issue to get the jab. The Vatican released a coin to celebrate vaccination, showing a doctor and a nurse and someone being vaccinated, as a celebratory coin. I mean, it's all of the different churches, all of the different religions, but it's like there's something above all of them which is influencing. So it's influencing the GMC. The GMC are, going after ethical doctors, are pushing, are stopping anyone speaking against the COVID jabs. But again, then you look at their funding, and they're, funded by pharma. Same with the MHRA, the drug regulators, 84% funded by pharma. So they've got their tentacles into everything, and everybody's singing to the hymn tune of big pharma and pushing more and more drugs onto more and more people. So back in the old days, doctors only treated the sick. Drugs were used for sick people. But now, pharma have their eye on this massive market of the healthy. If they can persuade healthy people to take drugs regularly for life, that is a better, more lucrative business model than just a few sick people taking drugs until they're better. So I think that's where, there's obviously huge amounts of money involved in this, and with money comes power.
Yeah. What do you think the role of groups like UKMFA and Heart and the various others should be? What I mean, maybe focus on your own, but also as a general comment. Because where some of us are very closely involved in our respective churches, there's not a lot of influence that we seem to be able to be having at a senior level there to make a difference. That continues to be a problem. But what do you think we can do as these freedom associations, freedom organizations that are largely Christian-based to move that forward?
I mean, I think as Christians, we are called, wherever we are called to speak the truth, to shine a light. So, and it does feel like we're David against Goliath, but who won with David and Goliath? He just needed that one little tiny stone and it knocked Goliath out. So I think we have to have faith that just speaking the truth, calling out corruption, having courage will have an impact, because all of these evil structures and lies and fear are very vulnerable to the truth, which is why they are censoring people. We really need to hold on to free speech. Yeah. We need to make sure that all of these things that are happening at the moment, which are giving the government an excuse to shut down free speech, that's very dangerous, because we need to be able to speak the truth. I think we need to be able to empower people. So actually people have a lot more rights than they believe. They don't have to do what their government says. It's like, do you remember the masks in shops or in airlines or even in churches, wherever? I never wore one and I still carried on with my life. But people believed you had no choice. But with informed consent, you and other ethical laws and codes, you always have the right to say no. But you've just got to know that. So I think we have to empower people with information to know what their rights are. From an ethics perspective, I want people to start demanding ethical medicine from their practitioners, from doctors and nurses, to say, no, you can't just do that. That's against informed consent. And to be able to read out to them chapter and verse. Because most doctors only do this because it's become a cultural sort of habit to disregard informed consent. But I think most doctors want to do good and care about their patients, and I think it's just, if you pull them up and say, hang on, what about informed consent? What about my right to refuse a treatment without any penalty or and without coercion? All of these things, we need to get doctors practicing patient-centered medicine again, and actually patients have a massive role in that, to demand that from them and say, I don't care about the protocol, what's right for me. Your duty of care is to me, the person in front of you, and my interests come above anything else, the interests of NHS or the public or whatever. My interests come first.
We've sort of got about 5 minutes before we need to, because we need to go and I need to go, but I think the one flaw I think in this is that people are not driven by, I think the COVID crisis showed us that people are not driven by facts or information, they're driven by emotions. And if there's fear about, and there's been various attempts to introduce fear for new viruses and new things that are being found, hasn't worked too well. People haven't taken it up, and people are much more worried about that than they were before. But I think it's shifting people from a position of fear to a position of comfort, of acceptance, of understanding, and using faith where they have it, and hopefully more will come. I mean, there's certainly evidence that more people seem to be going to church than there were, and that's driven by fear. That's, I think, the more difficult thing. So in the sort of closing few minutes, I mean, I think the struggle we have is not facts. People are often just blinded by facts or don't care about facts. And there are plenty of other facts that say something else. The statistics can be so easily bent. How do we move people forward to get them to a position of comfort and away from their fear and working with their emotions?
I mean, we need to lead by example. And courage, I do think, is contagious. And it does take courage to stand up, put your head above the parapet and say, actually, this is wrong. Or no, I'm saying no to this, and this is why. But I think isn't there a brilliant psychological experiment where you get one person in a big sort of group of strangers standing up and dancing, and everyone stares at them for a while, and then suddenly one other person will join. Then after a few minutes, 2 more will join, and then suddenly everyone joins in. So it's like we've got to be the ones who get up and start dancing and look stupid, because that courage will be contagious. And I think the other thing is we have to be really compassionate, because, you know, it says in the Bible, perfect love casts out fear. We have to try to resist being judgmental, being unkind, hateful toward, you know, calling people names, othering people who have followed the narrative, and actually have compassion for them and understand why. And just keep speaking the truth, because, you know, it says the truth sets you free, and the truth will knock down lies. And I think we're already seeing that the more, you know, now anyone can say, I'm a proud anti-vaxxer. You couldn't have said that 3 or 4 years ago. You know, they've given up censoring that because too many people just are speaking against the vaccines. So things change quite in culture quite quickly. The more people that just ignore the anti-vaxxer label or whatever the label is, then it loses its power. And then more people say, well, actually, yeah, I wouldn't have a COVID vaccine either. And then suddenly everybody's saying it. And then someone said, oh, well, I didn't really want one, but I did. And I don't want to have any more. You know, so I think it's just having the courage of our convictions and carrying on and letting go of the outcome, because all we can do in our sort of little, you know, our little way is just do what's right. And if we do what's right, we have to trust that God can work with that, you know, for his will to be done.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Been a bit rushed because of technical problems at the beginning, so slightly less time. But maybe as we move on in a month or so's time, we can meet again.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much, Bernie. Lovely to talk to you.
Very nice to see you. Lovely to see you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Right. Let's just see if that ends.